bring Paul Rieckhoff in on this, host of the Independent Americans podcast, founder and CEO, Independent Veterans of America. Thoughts here, significance, what's next?
It's a major escalation. This is a major provocation to have thousands of troops going into Russia, likely moving toward the Ukrainian border and potentially into Ukraine. This is how world wars start. I mean, this is a very significant development. Putin definitely needs more troops. He needs more meat for the grinder. He has a total disregard for his troops, and he needs to feed that machine. And North Korea has got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of troops. They've already been sending artillery pieces and weaponry. Now they're sending manpower. This is a very significant development.
There's a statement just in from a Republican, Mike Turner, who's the House Intelligence Committee chairman, who says if the North Korean troops move from training sites to the actual battlefront and begin fighting in Ukraine on behalf of Russia, the U.S. should consider, quote, direct military action.
I think that's all going to be on the table. I mean, if North Korea enters this war formally with troops on the battlefield, that is a major escalation. And also, keep in mind, the rest of Europe may not just sit on their hands, right? The U.S. may decide to sit this out, but Poland, other NATO nations, other surrounding nations may decide to move against North Korea. I mean, it's a major risk. It's turning up the heat. It's not turning it down. But it's also what Putin wants to do. Putin wants to draw more forces into this fight. He wants to draw North Korea in. Iran is now preoccupied with Israel. So this is to be expected, frankly, from what Putin will do. And he won't have any regard for UN treaties or any other international order. He and the North Koreans are going to do what they want to do.
What about the timing? I wanted to talk to you about the presidential race anyway. I know you've said there was a piece in Rolling Stone where you were quoted in it saying this could be something, the Ukraine war, before all of this was known, that could hurt Trump, right?
I think so. I think, people, especially in the defense community, veterans are tracking on this. They understand it's about much more than Ukraine. This is the biggest war in Europe since World War II. Yeah. And, our enemies and adversaries are pressing this chaotic moment. They know that we're preoccupied with our elections. They want to test our will. They want to test our integrity. Don't expect the Chinese to sit this out either. They're always eyeing Taiwan, so that's in play. It's a very volatile environment, and that's why the commander-in-chief test for our next president is going to be so important. When people go to the polls, they're going to be thinking about who do they trust to handle all of these situations and keep Americans safe.
You probably heard my conversation with Governor Sununu when I was brought up the stuff with General Kelly. There's also the article in The Atlantic, which we could talk about at the moment. There's a lot out there for veterans to consider. He was dismissive of it, doesn't think it's going to impact the campaign so much. This idea that, Kelly's used the word fascist when he was asked, same as Mark Milley has, and also had this to say, the suckers and losers comment that's gotten so much attention attributed to Trump. Listen.
He basically said to you that those who died for America on the battlefield were losers and suckers, and he said it more than once.
Yes, but he would not quite. He would say it would always, something else would get him going. Oftentimes, he never could wrap his arms around why people would serve the country in uniform. What was in it for them?
What was in it for them? Thoughts? You do so much work, by the way, as people know, on veterans issues. And
the partisans and the spin masters are out in force today. And I think Governor Sununu is a partisan politician who's obviously clearly aligned with Trump.
Yeah.
And for him to dismiss General Kelly, I think, is ridiculous and overtly political. General Kelly lost his son in combat in Afghanistan. This is a man who's a patriot. This is a man who cares deeply about his country, and he's sounding off now because he wants to issue a warning to America. And he's not alone. I mean, Trump has got everybody who used to serve with him against him now, including his former Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper. He's got General Milley, obviously, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, even people like Dick Cheney. I mean, Trump has got to go a long way to get Dick Cheney, who also, by the way, used to be Secretary of Defense, to now oppose him. So I think you got to cut through the spin in this moment and listen to trusted national security voices and people who have been bipartisan for the most part for their entire life.
Stick up the article from The Atlantic, guys, because that's the other one that's getting a lot of attention. This Jeff Goldberg piece that was out there about how Trump supposedly said, among many other things in this article, I need the kind of generals that Hitler had. And then that quote, see at the bottom, doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican. Quote attributed to the then president of the United States. He was talking about this young woman, allegedly of Mexican-American descent at Fort Hood who had been killed, and this was about her funeral costs. Trump campaign has denied all of this. The people involved are pushing back hard, saying none of this happened. Again, to the earlier point with Governor Sununu, there's 47, 48% of the country right now, right, in the polls that are going to vote for Trump. And I wonder what percentage of those people read that article, even looked at it, or listened to Kelly at all.
Not a lot. Right? I mean, that's why crossing over in alternative media, that's why Trump's going to do Joe Rogan on Friday, right? He's trying to reach people who aren't watching cable news.
And Harris probably should too.
Yeah, but I do think there's a chorus here that even if you're not an active news watcher, you hear a pattern of disrespect that's not limited to our troops and veterans, but all people. The person that he was allegedly talking about was named Vanessa Guillen.
Yes.
She was brutally murdered at Fort Hood and sparked a movement of reform because there was so much concern about her, a 2-month search for her body. This was a very high-profile case that resulted in the Vanessa Guillen Act that actually provided mental health support, sexual assault training, a total reform of the system. This is a very significant moment. And if you want to be commander-in-chief of the most diverse military on the planet, you've got to at least appear to respect all the people in it. And Trump's got an image problem here. All these stories are coming together all the way back to John McCain, and it's a problem for him. Whether or not the politicians and partisans want to admit it,
but
I do think it's stacking up, especially with independents and especially with veterans.
I thought Sununu's comment was interesting. Baked in, that it's all baked in. In other words, people hear about this and they say, oh, he says stuff like this.
If it was baked in, why are they all fighting so ferociously over a couple thousand votes in Pennsylvania? They're both trying to track down those hard-to-reach independents. Some of them are new voters who are voting for the first time. 60% of young people are independents. They care about their country. They're going to vote. They're doing their research, and they're still up for grabs. It might be a small number, but they're fighting like hell over them right now.
Well, speaking of independence, we have your promo for your latest podcast, which we're going to talk about this as well. I think you mentioned on the show last week here, but your podcast, Independent Americans, if you want to tell us about this episode a little bit. But independents, you're right, they're going to decide this thing.
Yeah, I'm talking to Tom Bowman, who's got a new podcast out, talking to a veteran who actually participated in the January 6th insurrection. He was found guilty of participating in that, and he's actually now back serving in the Marine Corps. So we're pulling apart why did people participate in January 6th? Is another January 6th going to happen? If not in Washington, maybe in somewhere else? And what's happened to this energy that surrounded that time? And we're continuing to talk to independent candidates like Dan Osborne, who we've talked about before, who's surging in Nebraska right now and could knock off Republican incumbent Deb Fischer. Could be the biggest upset of the year.
Aren't you surprised, though, how much January 6th has faded in some people's minds, especially those 47% we mentioned? You know,
I am, but I also think it's still there when people go to pull the latch for their vote or fill out their form. I think some of them are going to remember it, especially the older veterans who can't get that image out of their mind.
Right.
I think it was a very powerful image that's going to stick with a lot of people this year.
We'll see, I guess, in a couple of weeks. Yeah. You're right. Thank you, Paul. As always, Paul Rykoff.